Happy Hump Day, people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and thank you for joining me for our weekly in-depth interview here at Countdown to Classic. These hour-long interviews feature absolutely anyone who has something meaningful to say about World of Warcraft Classic. I sit down with a range of different voices, from the proverbial man-in-the-street players all the way through to well-known community figures. These interviews that you'll hear on the show are the very first time I've actually had a voice conversation with the subject of the interview, which is why you'll usually hear it takes about 10 minutes to warm up as we feel each other out. None of the questions asked in these interviews have been pre-screened with the subject of the interview. Whilst I ask for suggestions on what the interviewee would like to discuss on the show, they are hearing the questions for the first time. So all answers and responses are genuine and in the moment. Also, absolutely no favors or payments have been exchanged in return for an interviewee's appearance on the show, so there is no favoritism or shenanigans going on behind closed doors. Please do stick around until the tail end of the show, as not only do we put the interviewee through a few fun hypothetical questions, but also at the end of the interview, I'm really excited to be airing a new segment of the Wednesday episodes called Calling Countdown, where I play you the calls that the show took from you, the listeners, during the week about any World of Warcraft related topic that you wanted to get off your chest. This could have been a response to something raised on an earlier episode of the show, or just thinking out loud about something within the game. If you would like to be featured on this segment in the future, then please email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com, or join the show's fantastic Discord and private message me there. You can find the link for that in the show notes or on the website. Now, let's get into it with my interview with listener Dustin about raiding and speed running. Please enjoy. Thank you to the guest we've got calling in at the moment. Dustin, thanks so much for coming on.
No problem.
Basically, there's a few things that we want to know about you. Obviously, if we're about to get into the nitty-gritty of what you've got to say about the World of Warcraft. So what I figured we'd do, if you're up for it, is run through your resume.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Question number one. Whereabouts in the world are you from?
I'm from Detroit, Michigan, in North America. I lived here about a year and a half. When I was playing on Nestorius, I lived in Florida, in Orlando.
Too easy. And how long have you played World of Warcraft?
About 1 month since Classic came out, so I was pretty much in it right when it started.
Excellent. And what was your main character's name?
It was Freezing Fire. I was on Stormreaver US during Classic Retail. I was a rogue, though, and I rated as a rogue all the way through Classic. I also played a Warlock on another server. And I was actually a guild leader on that server when I was there, and we got pretty far. We got up to AQ40.
Oh, awesome. So you just mentioned a few classes. Were there any other classes that you hit level cap with?
A lot of classes. I mean, in Classic, it was just, I played a priest, a rogue, and a warlock, and in other expansions, I was a gladiator and a warrior, and a priest, and a rogue. So at different times, I was a gladiator during Burning Crusade.
Fair to say you've got a lot of experience. So was that a PvP or a PvE server you were on?
It was a PvP server.
Okay. And what was your highest rate experience? You mentioned AQ40, but did you get to Nax?
Yeah, I rated about half of Nax during Classic. We cleared Spider Wing. We did Instructor Vesuvius in the other wing. I know we killed Patchwork and the boss after Patchwork. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. And then the other wing, I don't remember. But I'd say we cleared about 50% of the bosses in there. The guild I was in at the time wasn't the greatest, but we were able to clear a lot of content.
And are you currently playing WoW, and where, if you're okay with telling us?
Yeah, I'm started playing on Chronos 3. It got released on Saturday, and I'm playing on Alliance there on a mage. And I'm just kind of slowly leveling. I'm kind of a casual now since I work full time.
Sure. What was the last server you were on before that?
Nostalrius. And I played on Anathema just for a couple weeks, but I couldn't really find a raiding guild because since I was on Nostalrius, when I played on Nostalrius, I was in college and I was able to raid like 24/7. And when I went to Anathema, when they re-released the Nost patch, or the player base or whatever, I tried to find a guild I could raid with on the weekends, but I wasn't very successful. So
okay, so did you wind up clearing Nax in later iterations of the game?
I never did, actually. I did in Wrath on, when it was like an entry-level dungeon, but that's about it.
So just those last few bosses has always been a bit of a bugaboo for you?
Yeah, I never got to do that, and I feel like even on these private servers, they're probably nerfed. I don't know exactly, but I know when we were doing Nax, it was extremely hard.
Fair enough. All right, one last question as part of your resume. Complete this sentence for the...
I'm definitely Alliance.
There you go.
I've played both, but I'd prefer Alliance.
Fair enough. All right, well, thanks for that. Now that we know a bit more about you, as you mentioned, your raid experience, you're obviously a far more experienced raider and player than me, but that's why I get you guys on here, because you know a lot more about the game than me, and that's why I want to hear from you and why the listeners want to hear from you. But thanks again heaps for coming on. So I just want to touch on, you got in contact with me earlier in the week after listening to the show and said that you basically would love to touch on some of the finer points of raiding in vanilla. So I guess we'll talk about that for quite a while here today, but I just want to open with this question. What is it that you love about raiding?
I like the competitiveness with speedrunning, actually. And I know a lot of people on the forums and Reddit and all that say that, we don't like that and blah, blah, blah. But that's really when vanilla is competitive, it is through raiding and speedruns. And you can make it the content as hard as you want. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how fast can we clear this content.
In terms of speedrunning, did you have to find a particular guild that was into that? Was that something you searched for?
Well, on Nostalrius, quite a few guilds were pretty competitive with it, but I got pretty lucky. I applied to Coalition, and when I did, I wasn't very geared, and honestly, I wasn't very skilled. And I thought I was skilled, but when I joined that guild, they kind of cleaned up my ability. Like they said, hey, you need to do this and hey, you need to do that. And since I streamed, they were able to watch my playbacks and say, hey, you can do this and hey, you can do that. And, in certain situations, you can increase your DPS by doing certain things differently, so that's helped me quite a bit.
That's pretty amazing that you get the kind of one-on-one coaching that, I guess a lot of times I do equate WoW back to sports in certain ways, but I guess that's one of them in terms of people taking you aside and actually actively taking the time to invest in you because you're going to help the team at the end of the day. Did you find that they were doing it in a really nice, encouraging way, or were they kind of like, dude, shape up or ship out?
No, they were very encouraging, and honestly, in that guild and in any competitive guild in that scene, everybody's working together and trying to, increase time as fast as possible. And everybody's doing everything they can to cut time. And honestly, after raids, we would sit there and analyze everything. Like we had multiple people streaming. So we would all sit there and, watch playbacks and say, hey, we need to do this. Hey, we need to do that. And it really made a difference in the long run. And as a guild, we could see differences over time that increased our speed.
You mentioned that your guild was Coalition on Nostalrius, and this was before it went over to the Anathema server, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I did a little bit of, as much research as I could on that guild, because I remember you mentioned to me in the emails through the week, so I thought, I better take a look into these guys and see what they did. And I found the following post. I just want to read this out to you, and I just want to get you to comment once I'm done reading and tell me if this rings a bell. So basically, for the listeners' benefit, as Dustin's mentioned, Coalition was a guild on Nostalrius, and apparently, tell me if I'm right, Dustin, Coalition got the server first Nax clear on that server. Is that right?
I honestly have no idea. Well, on Coalition before Anathema, only BWL was out. And we were doing the PTR for AQ40 when the server got shut down. In fact, the day that it went down, we were in AQ40 PTR with the devs in there, watching us and, trying to tune the dungeon. So that's pretty much where it ended.
Oh, okay. I see. I won't go into it then. I read that obviously it was a fairly accomplished guild, and that they apparently at one stage or another in whatever iteration of the server they were on, they got the first KT kill on a private server there. And I read it. It's funny because I read a couple of, and you would have gone through this. I read a couple of the applications that I found to get into Coalition, and some of them were pretty hefty. And I do remember from back in the day this notion of applying to guilds. And as you mentioned, you basically applied to Coalition in the end. Was that a drawn out process or not really?
For me, not really. And honestly, I didn't know anybody in the guild when I applied to them, but I think they saw that I was pretty dedicated, and I told them, like, hey, I'm going to make every raid, and hey, you know, I told them my experience. But when I look back on it, they took a pretty high risk with me, and I wasn't very geared when I joined them either, and they geared me out extremely fast, you know, because when you're in a guild like that, they don't have a high turnover rate, and they're not constantly gearing people, so they're able to just throw loot at people to gear them out. But to answer your question, no, it wasn't really a long, drawn-out process. But they did test me and, like, you know, see if I was skilled, you know what I mean? There's only so much you can do.
Right.
And one thing to add on a side note is everybody was from EU over there, and the server was EU, and it actually does make a difference on your DPS. If you're, like, in NA with a ping that's, like, 200 versus somebody that has, like, a 30 ping, you know what I mean? So that made a difference in the long run.
And obviously, is it something that they, as you said, they picked up on, but it wasn't obviously a killer for you because the ping difference still, I mean, I would imagine that it made you pay even that much more attention to make sure that you could keep up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's one reason I'm excited that, you know, Classic's going to be launched in the US is, like, my ping is going to be good. Because all these private servers are generally in the EU. So, but yeah, it does make a difference. You know, just between spells, you know, you can have that little small amount of time does add up over time, and it does make a difference. And I don't think I was able to keep up with a lot of people just because of the ping. You know, I'm kind of defaming myself, but I'm being honest. So.
No, and I appreciate it. I completely know where you're coming from with the ping just in regards to regular play, because obviously my experience in vanilla was coming from playing in Australia, and most Australians who listen to this show and who played the game in general will know we dealt with generally pretty ordinary ping back in the day. We all got somewhere between sort of 300 to 400 ping. And I'm only just trying to level and, you know, you could deal with it. It was fine, but I couldn't even wrap my head around high level rating with that kind of ping. Like just in dungeons, it was giving me the shit. So I respect that you dealt with that and handled your business well.
Yeah. And I can't imagine from Australia. That's pretty insane.
Turning back to the speed running angle here, because this is something that really intrigues me. As we touched on earlier, did you? Sorry, I can't remember if you mentioned earlier. Did you know that this guild focused on speed running when you got into it or when you applied?
Yeah, I was in another guild that definitely wasn't as good, and they had serious loot console corruption and other stuff going on, and they were interested in speedrunning, and, you know, they were happy when they got like a 55-minute BWL clear, and they were all happy, you know, so I knew it was a thing, and I knew raid stats was a thing, and I knew everything was tracked, and we were all looking at our, you know, it would rank you as a mage compared to the rest of the server on X boss, you know what I mean? So we would always be checking that out, and when I joined Coalition, you know, I knew, you know, that was something that they were 100% geared towards, and that was their main priority, if not their only priority.
So you just mentioned a time there, like a 55-minute BWL run. What was some of the best times or some of the interesting times that you remember getting through some of the content in?
You know, I know we had 38-minute. I want to say our fastest was around 36-minute BWL, and I think our fastest MC was like 25 minutes. But we didn't focus on MC. That was like our buffs were running up, and we were just going in there and I don't want to say having fun, but it was fun to us to clear fast like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. So I appreciate the not stopping to smell the roses approach, but obviously you guys have a goal and you're just gunning to achieve that. But how would you go about it? Would you obviously do your runs, practice, and then all take a step back and discuss tactics in town later on afterwards?
After raids, we would talk about it. I mean, everybody in that guild specifically was very active, so we were always in TeamSpeak, chatting and saying, hey, we need to do this next week. Hey, we need to do that. So it was like throughout the week, we would brainstorm what we were going to do. Prior to the raid, we were all logged out with buffs waiting for everybody to be in the TeamSpeak. Then we would all log in, and that's a whole different process that I can talk about. But, there wasn't really much time to talk about it before the raid because everybody was getting online and we were all getting prepared, you know what I mean? So it was like, everybody's here, okay, let's all log in, and then we would go.
Right. No, sure, well, let's get into it. You mentioned it. What was the kind of pre-raid process for getting ready for a speed run?
Okay, so like every week, the night before or 2 nights before, it depends on the person and when they can be online. We would go and do DM North. We would get like all the buffs from DM North, which was from the king. And then we would get that buff, and then we would run to Fellwood, and we would get a Songflower buff, which I'm not sure if you know what the Songflower buff is, but it's like you click on a plant, and it gives you a buff that gives you 5% crit. And then that buff only lasts an hour. So once you have that buff, you're kind of hauling ass, basically. I think the DM buff is an hour, too. Maybe it's 2 hours. I don't remember exactly. And from that, you would either, Dark Moon Fairy gave a buff, too, which was it ranged from 1 to 10%. And that was only once a month. So, like, every month, we would get one good run where we would have this 10% damage buff, basically. So you would basically talk to this DM guy and try to get the highest percent buff off of him because it was a random between 1 and 10, and you could only do it once every 2 hours. So you would log in, try to get the highest buff. If you got 8% or higher, you would like log out and save that buff. And then from that, we would get you'd basically run outside ZG Island. Now this is after patch 1.7. Once the ZG is up, you get the ZG buff, which is like the run speed buff and a stat buff. And then we would basically log out outside that island. So after you log out on raid day, we would all log in outside ZG Island, run to the island, and then somebody would drop the head from Hakar. Everybody would get the buff, and then we would all port to Stormwind, get the Ani buff, and then we would all run to BWL from there. So it was quite the process to get all these buffs, but it made a huge difference in the end.
That's crazy. Like, you're definitely telling me a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. But I mean, as I said, the things that I don't know about WoW could fill a room. But it's interesting because whilst I was always aware of speedrunning, obviously in games in general, but also in WoW, I didn't really pay much attention to it. And then through doing this podcast, I've tripped across more and more videos because I've been spending a lot of time on YouTube lately of people obviously attempting speedruns. And I think one of the more interesting was even going as far back as when I was researching Ian Hazakostas the other day for his takes on Ahn'Qiraj and Cthulhu when he did all the theory crafting for that. I think I tripped over an old video of his doing a speed run through ZG, which I found really interesting with his commentary over the top. So obviously, I mean, how did you first come to know about speedrunning or become aware of it?
Honestly, I went to Nostalrius, and it was just a popular thing once I started leveling. That was really my first private server. There have been other large ones in the past, but I'm pretty sure it got popular from those other servers, or maybe it even started on... I would assume it didn't start on NOS, but I'm sure it's just been a thing for a while.
In terms of tactics, was there something that, like, what would you guys generally do in terms of, I mean, obviously once you're at a boss, there's only so many ways to skin a cat, but in terms of a path or a tactical line from moving from boss to boss, what were you guys generally putting up there as a primary goal in movement?
Over time, everybody just kind of knew what to do. There was no, like, discussing strategies. We were, like, running in and killing stuff. But we were always brainstorming different ways to kill bosses. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I mean, as a small example, on Razor Gore, I've done that fight where people run around the room and kite the ads, and this guild just killed everything, which is the most logical thing. I mean, we had insane damage. Everybody was like super geared out, and we were all fully buffed. but we were always open to new ideas. That's one thing I see in the forums is people saying, you got to do it this strategy, you got to do it this way, and blah, blah, blah. And we were always open to doing something new. And one thing I'd also like to add is, people always say, hey, you need fire resist for Rag and all this stuff. We never wore any fire resistance gear for Ragnaros. Never happened. I don't think I ever wore any on any boss kill in any guild on NOS. Maybe a bad guild might wear it, but when you have geared healers and, everybody's knows what they're doing and everybody's skilled, you don't need it on that fight specifically. I know in AQ40, for Huhuran, you have to have NR. There's no way around it, but for certain fights, you can get away with it. You know what I mean?
Very interesting. That's actually the first time I've heard of, and I mean, it follows with logic that if you get a group of people together who are exceptionally skilled, then perhaps the fire resistance gear, its effect does get slightly watered down if you're burning this guy down relatively quickly. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had some negative experiences with a loot council system before. And as I'm not sure if you know, we've obviously touched on loot councils versus DKP systems here on the show in the past. What's your general take on the two?
I definitely think that loot council is the way to go. No questions about it. Although, like I did say, I did have a bad guild, but that was them trying to gear out their friends, and they were just greedy. You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to put your trust in your officers, and if they're shady, find a new guild. I think with a more casual guild, a DKP system might be better, but even then, you end up with people who hoard DKP, and then they say, hey, a paladin will want to roll on cloth mage gear, for example, a robes of volatile power, a Misandre from Nefarian, and that can't happen. If you want to optimize your raid and have the cleanest kills and all that, you need to put the right gear in the right people. And there are ways around that with DKP. You can always say, hey, only mages can bid on this item or whatever, and that's fine. And I've done DKP in the past, don't get me wrong, but I'm not a fan because people hoard. And I know on your podcast you mentioned why is DKP hoarding wrong? But it's you don't want somebody just trying to get the big items because everybody's trying to get that big item, and it's better to just spread your loot throughout the raid, in my opinion. I can't give you a specific reason why, but I just feel it's a bit more fair. If I was an officer, I would want my gear spread out throughout the raid. I don't know.
No, I totally understand it. It was actually one of the more fascinating topics that I've covered in the podcast, and obviously more fascinating for me because, as I say, I hadn't had that much experience with it. And whilst I was quite aware of the two systems, when I really dove deep into the nitty-gritty of the pros and cons of both of them, there really seemed to be a great argument for both, and people genuinely seemed split down the middle. So I totally understand people say, no, I'm for this one, or no, I'm for the other one. It seems like it's really interesting to hear people intelligently say, well, that's the problem with your system, and no, well, that's the problem with your system. But you mentioned that, I think you said you had personally gotten screwed a little bit by Loot Council in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, I was in a guild, and I swear I must have raided about 3 months, and I got one item that wasn't even best in slot, and it's the thing is, you have to determine, in my opinion, you have to determine what is best in slot for each class. You have to pick items, and you have to say, these are the items that we distribute. Everything else, in my opinion, with Loot Council, you should just roll them and say, if you win it, whatever. But now, one good point you made about DKP is, on progression, if you're trying to progress and you spend 8 hours trying to kill a boss and then you finally kill him and you get 15 points or whatever, and then next week somebody comes in and just clears everything, it makes it unfair. And I know DKP is meant to be fair, but it's almost impossible to do, in my opinion.
You've mentioned before, I think you said earlier, that were you a guild manager?
Yeah, I was during retail on a Horde server on my Warlock. I was for a while, and a long story short it for you, we were doing really well. We were the #1 Horde guild on that server, and then Blizzard opened up transfers, I want to say in patch like 1.9-ish, whenever AQ40 was out already. And some guild transferred into the server and like sniped a bunch of our members. And they were like way more progressed than we were because they came from a server that was like, had been around for a while, and they were further progressed down the line. And it pretty much destroyed my guild, and I was like, whatever. I ended up going back to Alliance and playing my rogue.
Well, you raise an interesting point that you did slightly allude to earlier, and that's in terms of competitiveness between high-end rating guilds. And you said that that's one of your favorite things about being in a high-end rating guild is being pushed to the limit by the competition. Now, how did you know where they were up to? Did you have contact with other guilds in your experience?
Well, when we were on Nostalrius, we were in contact with Nope, which was another top guild. I mean, Nope was pretty much ahead of Coalition most of the time that I was there. And towards the end, we were trading times. But anyways, we were killing world bosses with Nope. We had an alliance with them, and we would anytime a world boss spawned, we would contact them, and we wouldn't always have people online in the middle of the night. So we would help each other kill the boss, basically.
And was it outside of that sort of those rare circumstances of a bit of co-adventuring, was there a friendly rivalry, a bit of friendly banter between the two, or did it get nasty at times?
For the most part, in the open we were friendly, but behind closed doors, I would say we were like, fuck Nope, we need to beat their times, blah, blah, blah.
Fair enough. Now, is that something you'd be interested moving forward with Classic in terms of would you ever be a guild manager again, and would you ever would you ever have any interest in running a high-end rating guild of your own?
I would like to, but I don't think I have the time anymore. I work full time. I don't think that, I think you can still be a hardcore raider with a full-time job if you raid on the weekends or whatever. But a lot of guilds, they end up wanting to raid during the week. If I was in a guild that was on the level of, Coalition or Nope, I could probably do it because our raids were only 2 hours long at the most. So that's something you can do during the week if it's at the right time. But as far as leading it, I don't know. I would enjoy doing that, but like I said, time is a factor.
Definitely, and you raised something that I keep coming back to, and I haven't talked about a boatload on the show, but I will be delving into it a bit more going forward, and that's the difference between people's playing experience in the past, in the old vanilla days, versus what we're going to get with Classic. And obviously, we're all going to be, somewhere in the realm of 15-odd years older than the last time we had this experience. And how is that going to affect the way you play the game against how you used to play the game? So what's your approach with Classic going to be versus how you used to be?
Well, honestly, I'm probably going to take a week off of work when it gets released. I'm going to save up some vacation time. And then, from that, I'll just, primarily on the weekends, I'll get as much in as I can and get geared up as fast as I can. Because raiding, as long as you're in a decent guild, it doesn't take a long time to raid. With the exception of pushing progression in AQ40 or Nax. I don't think BWL progression's that hard personally, but some guilds have major issues with it. I know I wasn't in Coalition when they first cleared BWL. I was in a different guild, and I know Coalition cleared it. I want to say on the first night, but the guild I was in at the time, it took them weeks to clear BWL.
Obviously, you gained a fair bit of experience over time, and you, as you suggest, you've raided a million times, you're doing these speed runs, you're clearing this stuff in less than 2 hours, sometimes less than an hour. What advice would you have to listeners, or namely noobs like me who've never done much of this stuff before, in terms of, can you remember back to the time when you were still learning about all these entry-level raids and how you went about amassing the information and getting the skill up to be able to get to the position you're in now?
Well, when I first cleared MC and BWL, there weren't even guides online because I was doing it in Classic right when it came out. So we were kind of clueless on everything on how to kill stuff. But now there's so much material online. You can watch YouTube videos and read strategy and at least learn what all the bosses do and all their abilities. As long as you do that, for the most part, you should be just fine. But don't get me wrong, on these private servers, there are people that still don't know how these bosses work, and they have no idea what they're doing. And a lot of the people were a lot younger too, so it's, I feel when Classic gets released, it's not going to only be, obviously it's not only going to be like people who haven't done it for 15 years. There's going to be a lot of young people doing the content too.
I completely agree. I think a lot of people on the forums are underestimating the youth movement that we're going to get with Classic, and they seem to think it's all going to be seasoned veterans. And I sort of stress to people to understand the breadth of the demographic that we're going to have sort of pour into Classic once it releases. Yeah,
for sure. I definitely agree.
What would be your biggest pet peeve? You touched on some things that you said, even in private servers now, you see people sort of mucking up a little bit. What's your personal biggest pet peeve to see from a fellow guildie during a speed run?
Man, that's a hard one. Because like most of the people I dealt with were like extremely like dedicated to it. You know what I mean? But what I would say is when people come unrepaired and don't have flasks and all that, because we were flasking and all that too, if they don't come prepared with consumables, that can be annoying. But it's usually the same people that die to random, stuff. So that's a pet peeve, is you can't have people dying. If you have one person die, they lose all their buffs, and that can definitely impede the speed of the run.
You mentioned that the guild you were with prior to Coalition was a little bit shitty. What was the thing that made them shitty that was annoying you?
A lot of people were casual, and a lot of them didn't have mics. A lot of them didn't know the strategies on the bosses, and a lot of them would just randomly die. And it's really hard to know who's skilled and who isn't in Classic, especially when you're trying to focus on your own character and all that. You have people who are super experienced, who generally are officers, who can look around and pay attention and be like, that guy sucks, But when you're in a more casual guild, it's hard to fill those slots a lot of times. So sometimes you're just stuck with the people, So some people don't want to get better a lot of times, especially in these casual guilds. They're more just out for the loot, They just want their gear. They don't care about how well they play or anything like that.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the lag issue or the ping issue, and that you thought it was obviously playing on a private server was a huge advantage over what you remember from vanilla back in the day, and your ability to sort of get in on spells that little bit quicker and not dealing with lag. Is there a particular encounter or encounters that you would say are so better tuned for that lower ping and make the world of difference?
Honestly, I don't think so. Not off the top of my head. It was really just the spell, when you're casting, like I was a mage, when you're casting a spell and you're like Frostbolt, that little delay between your spell casts can cause slight DPS losses, maybe like 2% or something, but that 2% makes a big difference in the long run, I would sometimes, beat the other mages on certain fights, definitely, but mage is very RNG. It's like you can get crit, and sometimes you just don't crit at all, and then on top of the ping, it can really throw your damage down.
When you're doing your speed running, roughly how many add-ons would you say you've got running?
A ton, like at least 20. But they're not really like boss add-ons, I have a lot of like cast bar and just raid frames and stuff like that. You definitely want something where, if you're a decursor or like a priest, you need to have something that shows everybody that's getting decursed. But my personal opinion, since they're making a new client, I feel like these add-ons we have now aren't going to work. I think people are going to be making brand new add-ons for the new game. And one thing that I can say is I disabled the air sound on my game, like on my client. Like I deleted the sound that makes that click sound. When you click a spell,
yep,
it goes click, click. I would highly recommend to everybody to get rid of that file because it makes the play experience like 50 times better.
I can imagine.
That little click sound's so annoying.
Yeah, it drives me up the wall. I know what you're talking about. Was there one add-on in particular that you would say is your favorite and you couldn't live without?
I would say bartender and like a good cast bar add-on is definitely something I couldn't live without. That's the first thing I install when I play. I mean, if you don't have that, they do have stuff like Bigwigs that has like, the boss tracking and stuff like that. You probably need that for raiding, because certain bosses, they have like, for example, Chromagus will have like, his, call or whatever, where he does like the breath. Same with Nefarian, he has like class calls and all that. That's always nice to have. But I don't want to say it's not necessary, because I think for a new raider, you definitely want to probably have an add-on that tracks that. But it's not something you 100% need,
Now, I just want to hit on a couple of topics that we've raised on the show in the past that were relatively popular topics in terms of feedback from people and sort of tended to get people's blood boiling a little bit. The first one, and this would be a great question for you with the experience that you have, is do you think that all these years later and with all the experience that we have, and as you mentioned, the guides and all the information that's out there now, that the end game content when Classic is released will be quote unquote face rolled?
I think for a casual guild, they will struggle. That's my answer. But for a guild, now, a lot of the guilds that were playing on Nostalrius, they were raiding on other servers before Nostalrius, so they already did a lot of this content. A lot of these people had been playing together for years, 15, 20 people. So they were able to go in and just face roll it. But it's not easy. I think MC and BWL, I think that's the easier stuff. But when we were doing PTR on NOS for AQ40, we were wiping. I mean, it's not like we walked in there. We had completely decked out characters on the PTR, and we were wiping on easy bosses. So it's not something that you can face roll in AQ40. And I would imagine it's the same as Nax. You can't just go in there and clear it. Now, a lot of these guilds who probably cleared a lot of Nax like really early, like I'm assuming Coalition did pretty well in there on the other server, Anathema or whatever. I'm sure they were on the PTR before they went there. You know what I mean? So they probably got a little bit of experience before they stepped in there.
Understood. Now, in gathering from what you've just said, tell me if I'm way off in interpreting your words, but it almost sounds like what you're saying for me is that Classic will really be no different from what Vanilla was, in that you've got these high-end guilds, you've got casual guilds, and of course some people will be more skilled and will rip through the content when it's released, and then they've got the vast majority of us who are just the working class sort of theoretical WoW player who just potters around and does our thing and nothing will change. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's not, it's a synergy between players. It's that you can know all the strategy in the world and you can read all the strategy in the world, but you got to learn how to play together. A lot of these bosses are just, especially tanking fights, you need to know how to trade aggro and do stuff like that, like on Vale. Like the warriors have to control their threat and be in tiers, you know what I mean? So that when the first warrior dies, the second one picks it up. Because one little mishap and you can wipe. And, sometimes even in BWL when we were experienced, we would have people pull and then a dragon would breath the raid and kill the raid. And this is us being experienced doing BWL for months, and it's like sometimes people get too much gear and they pull aggro, and they don't know how to control themselves sometimes. So.
No, totally. I mean, it's always been a point that I couldn't get away from because a lot of people who are being so loud on the forums about the fact that this content will be absolutely demolished now by the general player base. I think the one thing that they're leaning on is that mid-tier players, when you combine them with all the information that's out there now, will all of a sudden become lifted up a tier, if you will, sort of to somewhat higher or high-tier players. And I completely disagree with that because I think, as you say, it still takes skill at the end of the day. And trust me, I read a shitload about WoW. It's sort of disgusting the amount of time that I spend consuming WoW related material. But I'm still a shitty player because when it comes time to doing this thing, that's the practical side of it that I just don't have experience in. So my opinion is that people will read, and then when it comes to time to doing it, they might not necessarily be able to implement it in the game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, even during Classic, I guess players weren't as good back then, but even during Classic they were releasing new servers throughout all of Classic where the content was like held back a little bit. And people had all the strategies back then, and I assure you, they were still wiping, so it's like, you can't, and now it's been, it'll be like 13 years or something since Classic roughly when it gets released. These people haven't played Classic for 13 years, a lot of them, except the private server people. So they're not going to be good at their class, I'll be honest,
Yeah, totally. I think it's going to be a little bit of a rude wake-up call in terms of memorizing everything all over again for people who haven't touched private servers. Now, the next topic I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, and it's a bit of an ugly one for some people, but it's the words dungeon retuning. What are your thoughts? Because some people have been calling out for it online for some adjustments to be made in Classic in terms of the difficulty or just retuning general numbers in either all the content or higher end content in Classic. What do you think about that?
I would say, if anything, I'm against it just because of the whole like slippery slope principle. But if they did it, I don't know. I think that, I'd like a heroic mode. That would be fun, but I don't think it's necessary. I think the whole speedrun aspect of it is challenging enough, and it never becomes easy, You're always pushing yourself further and further to pull quicker and do everything faster, and it creates a challenge in itself. That's my opinion on that.
So for someone like you, even though as perhaps unlikely as it might be, if Blizzard were to, and I know all the people gasping that I was talking about changes, but just in hypothetical worlds, if Blizzard were to implement some kind of speedrun mode or heroic mode, that would be something you'd obviously view positively and be a bit of a game changer for you, wouldn't it?
I would actually enjoy that. I would definitely enjoy it. There's no doubt about it. I used to, I rated in Wrath too pretty hardcore, and I love the hard modes, and I loved Yogg Saron with like the zero lights and all that stuff. I thought it really brought a next level to like the game. And honestly, that dungeon, I know I'm veering off of Classic right now, but Uldar was a pretty challenging dungeon, and I had a lot of fun there. So I would love if they did that in Classic too and added hard modes and made it harder.
Now, when you say add hard modes, would you change anything to do with the loot or just keep it as is and just give a hard mode for the people that want a hard mode?
I wouldn't want to change the loot. I would, if anything, I would say give an extra item, like maybe one extra item. I think that would be fair. But as far as adding a whole new loot table, absolutely not. That would break the game, if you ask me.
So we just touched on basically the ugly topic of changes versus no changes a little bit versus in discussing hard modes and things like that. Where do you lie on that spectrum?
I said before that I'm kind of against it just because of the slippery slope, but I would be for hard modes. And as far as changes, I would prefer they left it as is altogether. There's certain things I would like to see changed, and I know a lot of people hate hearing this, but I wish they had dual spec. I understand the economy aspect of it and how they need people to dump money into the economy and all that, but maybe something. I feel I used to respec twice a week. Every week I would respec for PvE and then I would spec back for PvP. And I would pay it, but it's annoying. And I know for a casual it's even more annoying. And I feel you're going to have a lot more raiders if they have the dual spec option there. But I don't know how bad that would affect the economy, but that's my final opinion on it.
Fair enough. All right, what I want to do now is I want to get through a bit more of a few fun questions about your personal thoughts on the content that you ripped through. What was your favorite raid and why?
In Classic or just...
In Classic.
I would say, I like Nax. I like the feel of Nax. And, like I said, I only did that in actual retail Classic, but I liked it because it was hard and it was challenging and we were constantly trying to progress. And I love doing progression pulls and stuff like that. It's, everybody's working together. Everybody's trying to brainstorm on how to do what, and I feel there's the most synergy within the raid, within the community of your guild when you're doing something like that.
You seem to allude to it. If we weren't talking vanilla, you might have a different answer. So for a bonus point, what in general in the game, what's been your favorite raid?
I think Uldar and Wrath, although I raided in TBC also, and I had fun in TBC, but I would say Wrath because the hard modes were really fun. And I remember, like I said, I like progression, and I like doing progression pulls. And a lot of those fights in there were total progression, constant brainstorming and doing pulls. And there's so many hard fights in that dungeon that it was a blast.
What would be your least favorite raid and why?
In Classic, I would probably say ZG. I like ZG, but I like all the raids in Classic, honestly. But I would just say that's probably my least favorite just because it's so long and it's like there's no loot off any of the bosses that's useful. You're basically just like DEing stuff, and the only reason you're there once you have, once your raid is like pretty geared out and doesn't need anything specifically, it's basically for like head enchants and leg enchants. So it's kind of like annoying to do.
What's your favorite boss encounter?
I want to say something ridiculous. I'm going to go with Princess Hooran. And I know that's the most ridiculous thing, but I remember doing progression on that, and that was a lot of fun, like getting all the NR people up and finally killing her and then going to the Emps. I don't know. I had a lot of fun clearing that. At least in Classic, that was my favorite one for sure.
No, for sure. And that kind of seems to relate back to your pushing for that drug of achievement that you like, the progression side of things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was just a weird fight because at the time I was a rogue. So I was one of the people who was like soaking NR damage. So I was like, we were all farming our like NR gear and stuff. And it was like kind of ridiculous. Like we're all in super crappy gear. A lot of it's like from Moradon and stuff. And it was ridiculous.
Okay, Dustin, so you're a listener of the show. As you know, every episode I do a anger management segment where I read out people's rants about things they were angry with in the game. So what I'm going to do with these interviews is I'm going to give the interviewee a chance for a personal anger management moment and let you get off your shoulders any kind of rant you've had with the game. So here we go. Is there something that you would like to rant about with World of Warcraft?
Okay, I don't know if it's not directed towards World of Warcraft specifically, but what I kind of want to rant about is a lot of these, like, not you, I think you're doing a great job, no joke, but a lot of these streamers who are going to come in and capitalize on Classic when it comes out, and I don't mean soda poppin', I think he's been playing it since back in the day, and I think he's a good player, but people like Asmongold are just going to jump on the topic, and they're going to come in, and I don't think he's a good player, and I don't know. That's my personal opinion. I know he's more of like an entertainer, but I don't know. I just think that he's just there to play, and I don't even think he's going to enjoy it, So it's like, I think he's happy doing his thing on retail right now, and whatever expansion they're in right now. So
that's all good. Look, I appreciate, like, there is somewhat of this. A lot of people do question the influx now of the streamer culture, and I won't lie. Obviously, I might be a part of the problem doing things like this and seeming to garner attention from the Classic popularity that's come through recently, and I'll take that. I'm fine with that. But in saying that, I do appreciate a point that you raised in that, and it seems a lot of people are starting to say that the bulk of these really, really popular streamers, it seems that people get the feeling they don't even necessarily like the game anymore, but they can't walk away because it's now become a source of income for them potentially, and it puts them in a rather precarious position. Would you think that might be the case?
100%. It's gonna be the flavor of the month. They're gonna jump on it, and I don't think it's just gonna be a flavor of the month. Maybe for them, but I think Classic is gonna do really well when it gets released. And like I said, I don't think they're gonna even enjoy it. And what's gonna be even funnier is that they're gonna be streaming with X amount of viewers, thousands of viewers or whatever. And people are going to camp them, and there's going to be very little that they can do about it. So I'll find that funny. I don't know.
That's a really good point, and it's so funny you mentioned that. I was literally riding home yesterday reading all about this very point. And again, I'm so fucking stupid that I never even consider these things. I read a lot of forum posts from people going either A, I will be looking for this person when they're playing the game, or B, I hope this person realizes how much negative attention and PvP camping is coming their way if they broadcast, which they will likely have to do, their character's name and what server they're on.
Yeah, and classic, you can't just stand in a city and like auto queue, and get into a dungeon. You have to like travel there. So they're going to have to leave the city eventually. So they're going to probably get attacked. There's going to be people who just, I'm telling you from experience, like I'm not a popular streamer anymore, but when I was on Nost, I would get like 20 to 30 viewers, and a lot of those viewers were people just trying to kill me. So like, I know just from that many viewers that it can be a nightmare. And with, them having thousands, you can guarantee, say there aren't server transfers or cross servers or anything like that, which I'm assuming there won't be, at least in the beginning. People will level characters on that person's server just so they can camp them. Like, people are that dedicated to do stuff like that. So we'll see what happens.
Definitely, and I can't wait. Like I've said on the show, I have every intention of jumping on a PvP server. It's not an experience I had before. It's something I need to see, even though I am shit at this game. So if listeners or if anyone wants to camp little old WoW podcaster, the character that I'll be creating in World of Warcraft Classic, hopefully also name something like that, then just know that you're killing one of the worst players in the game. So whatever satisfaction you take from that, so be it. But we'll move on. And the last segment I just want to have you sit through, and thank you so much for taking the time again to speak with us today, Dustin, is I want to put you on in a little segment I'm going to call the hot seat. And I've got fun questions I just want to run you through. Take your time in thinking of your answers if you need a moment. So let's start off. And I'll ask you with this one as an opener. Now, ruling out when is Classic coming out, if you could ask one Classic-related question of the devs right now, what would it be?
Damn, you got me. Give me a second. All right, I'd like to know if the talents are going to be patch to patch or if they're going to do a 1.12 type patch where all the paladin talents, priest talents, everything has changed. Because that's a big difference, like the classes were overhauled quite significantly, especially paladins, like they were totally changed.
And what would your preference be?
I would rather they release everything patch to patch, like everything patch to patch, all the items. A lot of the bugs they would obviously have to fix, which would be outside of Classic, unfortunately, but there's a lot of things they could change, like as far as like dire mall farming and stuff like that would really break the game, because I personally farmed in dire mall like all my gold, so like if they fixed that, that'd be pretty game breaking to me, and I'd be kind of sad about it. But
so when you say patch to patch, do you mean starting from 1.1?
Yeah, from 1.1. And, major fixes like people falling through the world and stuff like that, I would hope that they fix that. But, stuff like Warrior Rage, it was a lot harder for warriors to tank, in dungeons when the original patch came out, which makes a difference in just PvE progression, Like, those dungeons, those 5-mans were hard for warriors to tank. I'm just going to say that because, of their talents.
For sure. Okay, next question. Fuck, marry, kill. We're going to play a quick game of fuck, marry, kill, and apply that to however you might think with these 3 bosses from end raid content. So whether it's, I'd marry this person because I love that boss, or I'd kill this person because I hated that boss, or I'd fuck this person because I kind of secretly like that boss. All right, the 3 bosses are fuck, marry, kill. Kel'Thuzad, Cthulhu, and Onyxia. How would you do it?
I killed Onyxia so many times, so fuck Onyxia. I'm going with kill Cthulhu, and I'd like to marry Kel'Thuzad because that's like a fun progression boss. Cthulhu's just annoying. I don't know.
Fair enough. Okay. Next up, If you were stuck on a desert island with one character from the game, who would it be and why?
I'm going with Nestinwary just because I feel like he could maybe like make a boat. He's like a hunter and stuff. He could maybe navigate me off the island. I don't know. He always ends up in like every like continent, you know, throughout the whole like history of the game. So I feel like he could find his way out of there.
No, very interesting. I hadn't even considered that. I was thinking you were going to, we would go with someone you'd be happy to spend eternity on. I hadn't even thought that you might actually want to escape off the island. Very good answer. Okay, next question. What's the meanest thing that you've ever done in the game?
Oh man, I'm like the worst. Well, what I could say on this story is, and I'll give you a little quick side story. Me and my friend, there were a lot of Chinese farmers that farmed in Dire Mall, and I don't mean to like bring race into this or anything like that. But anyways, my friends and I, when we were like between raids and bored, we would farm DM, but we would get locked out of the dungeons. So we would sit there and we would kill the Chinese farmers like all day, and yeah, we would basically camp them over and over, and they were all mages. So we would get hordes of like undead mages attacking us. Like I'm talking like there would be about 3 of us, and we would have 10 to 15 mages attacking us all at the same time, and they were all like super undergeared. So we could kill like a lot of them without like being phased. You know what I mean? And yeah, that's my story.
Wow, so it was super obvious who the farmers were.
Yeah, all their names were like super Chinese, and like when they talked, you wouldn't be able to see any text because it was all in like Chinese text, so it wouldn't appear on our client. So it was pretty obvious.
Okay, there you go. Now, next question. What's the class that you suck at the most?
I've played it quite a bit, but I would say Druid. I just, I don't know. I never had a Druid that I leveled myself. During retail, I would play my friends' Druids and do arena on them, and I knew how to like play Resto, but if I was like doing Feral or something like that, I had no clue what I was doing.
Okay. Now, what's your guess for the release date of Classic?
You know, I wanna say tips out, man. Yeah, it's coming soon, but I just think that deep down in my gut that it's gonna be like January next year. Rough guess.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Now, last 2 questions. What was the moment that you fell in love with World of Warcraft?
Well, before I got the game, which was during Classic, like 1 month in, I had the strategy guide, and I was like in another state, and I didn't have a computer, and I was like reading my strategy guide, like getting ready to go home and play it. I was so excited, and then when I got it, I mean, I fell in love with it like right away. I was basically like, why haven't they made this before? And I never played EverQuest or anything like that, so I didn't have any other like major MMO experience, but I mean, it was almost like right when I started playing it, I fell right in love with the game.
Okay, now, last question for you, Dustin. Tell me why you are excited for World of Warcraft Classic.
I'm happy because we're going to have US servers. We're not going to have to worry about Blizzard shutting the server down. We're going to have great pings. You know, I'm just thrilled about it. Like, it's almost unbelievable. When I heard the announcement, I was ecstatic.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks so much again for coming on the show, Dustin. I cannot thank you enough. You've been fantastic. Now, before you go, is there anything you'd like to plug? Any YouTube channels, any content that you do that you'd like to tell people about?
I mean, I have a stream. It's Dustin_live. I play here and there, mostly over the weekends. I'm just leveling characters right now, just trying to have some fun until Classic comes out. You know, anybody's welcome to come on in and say hi, you know. Anybody's welcome to come and try to group up with me, you know. That's about it.
For sure. And that's a stream on Twitch, is it?
Yeah, it's twitch.tv/Dustin_live.
Fantastic. Well, Dustin, again, I can't thank you enough. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And if you're ever free later down the track, we'd love to have you back on sometime.
Yeah, sure. Anytime you have a topic that you think I can plug in, just shoot me a message. I'd be happy to come on.
Great. Thanks, mate. Hey everyone, it's me again. I hope you all enjoyed that great chat with Dustin. I know it was a lot of fun sitting down with him and going through all that stuff. If you have any comments or feedback about that, then please do get in touch with the show at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. But with that done, I now proudly bring you 3 short calls with people just like you, fans of the show, with the very first edition of Calling Countdown. All right, we've got someone on the line now. We've got listener Minoru. Minoru, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. And if listeners don't know, you're definitely a contributor to the show. You've now had a couple of things read out from our Discord channel, isn't that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
And I thank you very much for continuing to write to me and give me some great content to read out to the fans. But today you said you had a quick call about quest text, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. When I played vanilla, I always just picked up quests, read the objectives, and completed them just like a shopping list. If I struggled to find something, I might skim the quest text for clues, but normally I just ask chat or use Thoughtbot or Alakazam. And thinking back, I wonder how much I missed out by not reading the quest log.
I often didn't read the quest text well enough, and even though I'd read it, I wasn't really absorbing it, and I was running around like an idiot on these quests. How did you go after reading them? Did you take it in on the first go and usually do okay?
I just kind of picked them up, and it's just like a big shopping list, and ran through them. But I do remember at some point a Blizzard developer lamented the fact that they worked so hard on writing these quests, only to find out that not many people took the time to actually read them. People might think it's mundane, but there's a lot of factors that go into writing the quest text. It might seem small, but they're essentially coming up with new lore. They'd have to make sure everything they write doesn't conflict with anything else in the game.
Definitely. And do you find that generally you always try to stop and smell the roses and read the quest text? Because I know that I try to do it as often as I can, but obviously there are times when, like you say, you're just zipping through quests and you're kind of like, oh, yeah, whatever, save whoever, pick up whatever, I don't care, let's just do the quest. How do you do it?
I don't think I did back in vanilla, but I definitely plan to now. With the release of Classic. And so actually to honor those quest creators, I proposed my Classic resolution. It's like a New Year's resolution, but for the release of Classic WoW.
Sure.
I vow to read every quest I accept and complete.
Wow. So every quest, your Classic resolution is everything you pick up, you will read every last word.
Yes, and given that I plan to play a paladin, I should have plenty of time to read while auto-attacking enemies to death while leveling.
I would imagine, absolutely, and I commend you for such a resolution. I tell you, I wish I could do it, and I'm with you. I tell you what, I will join in on your recommendation there, and I will try to read as much quest text as I can as well. I know that when I play, I really do try, and I enjoy it, and I totally agree with what you're saying there. I think that people... not that it's a slap in the face or anything. We don't do it out of disrespect, but people really do bypass what is a crap ton of work put in by the writers for this game. And a lot of blood, sweat and tears goes into crafting exactly what you said, entirely new lore. Now, it might not be significant lore, but it's lore nonetheless, and it all has to tie into things. And as we have at things like BlizzCon, some people pick up on the loose ends and call Blizzard out on it.
Yeah, exactly. And if I may, I dare every listener to also take on a Classic resolution, to do something they've never done before to enhance their experience or the experience of others. Like maybe take a new player under their wing or host a dueling tournament, or maybe be a little cheeky and make a habit of fishing in the enemy faction's main city. Something along those lines. Just as long as it's not a generic get rank 14 in PvP and finish Naxxramas.
I think that's a very, very good idea, and it definitely falls in line with an ethos that I'll be carrying into Classic, and tell me if you're somewhat of the same. I'm sort of vowing to myself, as you've heard multiple times now on the show, to do everything sort of the opposite. I'm going full George Costanza with Classic, and I'm doing everything the opposite of what I normally would have. So before I played Alliance, now I'm playing Horde. Before I didn't touch PvP, now I'm going to throw myself into it. I never raided before, now I want to be a dedicated raider, things like that, and just get a completely different experience. Do you find that that's what you're going to be looking for?
Pretty much. I'm going to be doing stuff that I felt like I didn't really pull off in vanilla. And I assume a lot of people are going to do the same.
Let's hope so. All right, Minoru, well, thank you so much for calling in. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your continued contribution to the show. And you're the first caller for Countdown to Classic. How does that feel?
Yes, thank you. Take care, and thanks for having me on.
No problems. Thanks, mate. All right, we've got listener Valda calling in. And Valda, where are you calling from in the world?
Melbourne, Florida.
Fantastic. And what is it that you wanted to mention today?
Well, I've been thinking for a while and discussing with my brother, Minoru. He's probably a bit of a known name to the listeners. When we first started Vanilla Warcraft, we had no idea what to expect. And really, that kind of discovery is certainly a large part of where people get their memories from. People are now going into the game, I'm worried, with too many expectations and kind of like a plan preset in their mind as to what they're going for. People are going in with the idea of, I'm going to PvP, and I'm going to rush raiding. And a certain discovery factor has been lost. I feel like some people might not hold the same passions that they used to just because they already know what that passion was.
Is there anything that you're going to be doing to try and sort of combat that?
Well, when I played in Vanilla, I was a tank, and really I've always wanted to be a tank. I remember a specific moment that I'll probably write into you in the future about that cemented that in my mind, but I'm definitely going to be making a lot more alts. I leveled Protection Warrior from 0 to 60 from open beta till all of the expansions, and really just experiencing other classes is something that I really need to do.
And I guess, would you agree that that's kind of the answer to the problem, in that, yes, unfortunately we do have this game that we've all become, perhaps some of us, a little too familiar with. But the one way and the beauty of World of Warcraft is that there's always a different way to experience the same game, in terms of simply changing one's class or race, perhaps even. And is it something that you're going to try and get, as you said, try and get as many alts out there as possible that perhaps you weren't doing before?
Yes, certainly. The first time I played through, like I said, I was a warrior tank the whole way through, but I had the mage alt. Entering the game now with all of the knowledge everyone has, warrior tanks are going to be everywhere, and mages are going to be everywhere as the most kind of desirable classes in both PvP and raiding. They're both very powerful. So to maybe combat that, I've been wanting to level a paladin, a hunter, a rogue, experience these play styles I've never done before. But at the same time, I still worry that it's going to fall into a numbers game that it never was before.
In terms of your experience mainly as a tank, is it, I mean, you haven't sort of mentioned anything about heals or anything like that. Is healing anything that ever interested you and would interest you enough to push you to at least try that for a different perspective in WoW Classic?
Oh, yes, absolutely. From the tanking perspective, I had all sorts of healers that had enjoyed my company because I was able to keep them alive. But at the same time, I enjoyed theirs because it's a symbiotic relationship. And being one of these more desirable classes, I've always thought, is an easier way to make friends, because when you find someone who's skilled at their particular archetype, you kind of want to stick around them. You know, everybody wants their pocket healer, their pocket tank, their solid DPS. And exploring these other routes is definitely going to keep the game somewhat fresh.
Definitely. Do you think you come across as someone who maybe is subscribing to a little bit of the pay it forward theory, in that you've been the beneficiary of so many heals over the years, maybe it's time to give back?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thinking back on it, almost all of the people I knew were healers, and I have almost no interactions with other tanks other than the people in my guild who I played chess with and all kinds of things. It's going to be interesting figuring out what type of people play tanks and the different challenges of the different roles, just because I never had to experience that before.
Sure. Well, tell me, in your experience as a tank, and as you say, the bulk of your time in WoW was spent as a tank, I'm going to be having on the show, hopefully within the next 4 weeks or so, in one of our interview episodes, someone who came forward to me and really wanted to get a bit of a tank expert's opinion out there on the finer points and the art of playing a tank. Tell me, as a long-time tank, because I have absolutely no experience as a tank, what are some of your hopes and dreams for Classic in terms of how people deal with or perceive tanks?
I hope people go into it with a knowledge that tanking in vanilla was never really an easy thing. Sometimes people might think, oh, you just drop a couple sunders and then you sit there and wait for everything to die. But it's constant target switching. It's constant prioritization over which enemies are about to attack the healer, or trying to compensate for a DPS who has decided that they don't want to attack the thing you marked. I hope people go into it realizing that if someone has laid out a plan, a strategy for the group, sheep this, sap that, I'll pull this, focus on this one, people, listen to that. It's for everyone's benefit.
Well, that, and I guess as a tank, your constant abuse of healers has to be on point as well, right?
Oh, yes. Going into it with all the knowledge we have now, I'm definitely, if I do continue to roll a tank, which I know in my heart of hearts I definitely am at some point, I'm going to go in specifically getting the stat line and the gear that I know I'll need to help make their lives a little bit easier, and hopefully help keep the blame off of them when you always wipe. It's going to happen.
Definitely. I always viewed it as like leveling up a weapon or a profession. Like your healer abuse is now level 163.
Yeah, just sit in the deep run tram and hit rats with your healer abuse weapon, raise the weapon skill up.
Absolutely. And now, what's the one piece of advice that you would give someone who is considering playing a tank like myself for the first time in World of Warcraft Classic?
I think the biggest piece of advice I'd give is have health bars up, and don't spend time watching where the enemies are going. Spend time watching the enemy's health bar, because if something's going down and it's not what you're targeting, someone else is taking that out. And you've got to keep that managed.
Yeah, that was usually me as a rogue back in the day, targeting the wrong thing and burning it down and drawing the threat.
Hey, just press tab. It works.
I'm still wrapping my head around that little skill. But thanks so much for calling in, Valda. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. You have a good couple of interviews, and enjoyed listening.
All right, we've got Discord member Valerie's Gun on the line. Valerie's Gun, how's it going?
Going pretty well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for calling in. Do you mind if I ask where in the world you're calling in from?
Calling in from Sacramento, California. So that's going to be on the West Coast in the U.S.
Very nice. And what had you call into the show today?
Well, something that I had on my mind after listening to the most recent episode concerning subscription fees was that naturally, I think Classic is going to have subscription fees. Blizzard is in the business of making money, and with all of the work they're going to do, they need to reap that benefit back, and they want to also sustain the servers. I'm
going to stop you there. I don't know. I think we start a whole campaign of just give it to us for free and stop this changes versus no changes stuff. Just free.
Yeah, I'm sure the no changes crowd would love that. But here's the thing. You mentioned that there's a lot of people that think that we'll just have one static $15 monthly charge. Mm-hmm. And with that payment, you can bounce back and forth between retail and the Classic servers. Mm-hmm. But I know, or at least I feel that the no changes crowd, and I'm one of those people that leans more no changes, but I'm absolutely up for some changes. I feel that if we had one subscription that covers everything, you're going to get a lot of people who are playing Classic that are maybe they're a little more outspoken and they have more complaints that will be posted on forums and going to all the moderators and stuff. And I don't necessarily think that's a great idea to represent the Classic community.
That's a great point. Well, what do you think in your gut that we're getting for a subscription model?
I can't say what we might be seeing, but what I would ideally like to see is a separate subscription model. And the reason why is because the way Blizzard could look at it, they're making twice as much profit. If they wanted to justify having retail, maybe they felt more entitled to it. Maybe they could do like a slight discount, like maybe it's $25 a month and you get to play retail and Classic. Mm-hmm. And we've heard time and time again that the retail team that is developing for that game is vastly different from the team that is developing Classic. So it almost wouldn't make sense to have one fee and have someone who is currently playing the game play another game that is also coming out when they are very different games. I suppose when it boils down to it, I would prefer to have 2 separate subscriptions just because of all the reasons I stated. And I think you would get less trolls in the game.
Definitely.
So I think a lot of people might honestly be thinking about that as well.
That's something that I hadn't even considered. This is how naive I am. Only now on hearing you say that, God, I should think further ahead. I only realized that you're going to get people coming over from retail and just spamming chat going, you fucking classic freaks.
What is this shitty ass game? Why does it take me an hour to get to level 5? Why do I not have a mount at level 10 or whatever? You're going to get a lot of people just bitching about Classic, but that wasn't the population that we were targeting. And then you're going to have people in Classic basically doing the same thing about retail because they have access to both games.
Definitely. And I think Blizzard would be in the mind of not creating any further division amongst the player base.
Yeah, but the thing is that the Classic community, I don't think it would be happy with the having one subscription to rule them all, basically. I don't think they'd be happy with that because they have no reason to go play retail. If they were playing retail, they'd be playing it now, and they'd still be crying for Classic. And I don't think you're going to get that many people going back and forth. It's going to be one or the other.
Definitely. It's a very good point. My thought behind it now, whilst I definitely realize there's pros and cons for all of the different subscription theories that are out there, the reason that I lean towards the fact that they'll do one fee to rule them all and one fee to bind them is that it's more so to drag the Classic players back into retail. I do think that might be Blizzard's marketing tool here, in that if you get a lot of players back into the game that have been gone for years and have retail openly available to them with the gate left open, they might, when they're done leveling their character to 60 in Classic, or let's say there might be a lot of tourists, who just get a character to 10 or 20, check it out for a month and then want to leave. They want to retain those people by having them go, let's just have a little look-see at what's happening in BFA, and then they might get clawed back in. Who knows? That's just my sort of gut feeling on that one.
Yeah, I hear you, and that's a really good point. It's hard to say exactly what they'll end up doing, and I know everyone kind of has their own idea on how things are going to go, and since we haven't heard any news, it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen since we're at least a year and a half out from release.
Definitely, it is very hard. But you mentioned that you're no changes, but you're open to some changes. Would that leave you kind of no changes but curious?
I guess you could say that.
Fair enough. I'm sure there's definitely a large portion of the no changes crowd that kind of feel the same way. And as I've said on the show myself, like I'm open to discuss anything, and I will happily take anything that Blizzard gives me. So while I lean no changes, I know there's a lot of us out there that are kind of like no changes, but whatever. Yeah,
I mean, the occasional shadow here and there wouldn't hurt anything, or a slight touch up on a couple things, or fixing broken quest lines. That'd be perfectly fine. That's still within the realm of vanilla. But adding transmog, for instance, or flying mounts, these are the things that are just absolutely out of the question, really.
A shadow? How dare you? How dare you, sir? You are out of control. Oh my God, a shadow. No changes. No changes. I love how upset that people get over just something as simple as the shadows. Like I personally, I'm totally down with shadowing. I think that would be a great addition, but we'll see what they do.
Yeah, I agree. But when it comes down to it, you can't please them all.
Definitely. Anything else you want to get off your chest, or is that about it?
I think that's about it.
Cool.
I just wanted to bring that point up, but I'm really glad that you brought both sides into the equation and kind of discuss what could potentially be once we actually see Classic release.
All right. Well, thanks very much for calling in, Valerie's Gun, and we'll talk to you again later on. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Josh.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Well, that's it for the very first calling countdown, everyone. As you can see, I'm really going for that talkback radio style vibe for that segment. And I give all of you, the players, a place where you can actually have your voices heard on your thoughts on the game, rather than just read without tone or context on a forum. But if you enjoyed that and you want more of it next week, here's what I'll need from you. I'll need you to call me. Much like the Memory Lane segment of the show, this segment lives and dies by how involved all of you get. I take these calls from 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time onwards on Friday and Saturday nights. So if you're around and you're not doing much, please do give it a try. Please don't be shy, as I've had a few people contact me and say they'd love to call in but were feeling a little bit gun shy. But as you can hear, it's all pretty laid back, and you just get to say your piece, perhaps with an easy question or two from me afterwards. So please do hit me up, everyone, as I'll need more of those calls for next Wednesday's show. Anyway, that's the show for today, everyone. Please do tune back in for Friday's episode, when we'll be going over the history of some of the more famous or infamous player events during Vanilla, such as the Serenity Now funeral gate crash, the Million Gnome March, and perhaps a bit of Leroy Jenkins. So stop by for that one, as it should be a bit of fun. And we'll give us a short bit of respite from the lore for a week. But all you lore heads, please don't worry, we'll get back into it with a doozy the following Friday, with the deep history of a certain central character whose name might rhyme with mole. Anyway, as always, everyone, please do subscribe to the show where you get your podcast from. Please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps so much. And please do tell a friend about the show. It really, really helps us get the word out there and spread the love and get people involved in this community. Have a great Wednesday, and I'll see you all again in 48 hours. Bye.